Lesson 9-4, Record and Interpret Data. By the end of today's lesson, you will be able to make and interpret frequency tables. Make sure you have your piece of paper and a note or a pencil ready so that way you can work right along with me and take notes as you need to. In today's lesson, we're going to take a look at how to record and interpret data. So on this chart right here, we see various times that it took for sixth graders to run the 100-meter dash. They've recorded all the different times here, and now we're going to take a look at a couple of different ways of organizing this data. Okay, one way of recording this data is called a cumulative frequency table. In this way, you group different amounts of times together. So instead of listing each individual time from this chart up here, they've grouped it and made a range. So here they have 13.6 seconds to 14 seconds, and then you make a tally for each time you see any number within that range. Here then, they've just written the number in numerical form. So this tally and the frequency, these two numbers will match. On this last column, we see cumulative frequency. This is how much it is in this range plus the range above it, so the total amount. So in your first column, that's just going to stay the same, 10, because that's all that we've looked at. Once we get to this second range, here we have 13 tally marks. So then we write the 13 here. Now we need to add this 10 plus the 13, and we get 23. That's our cumulative frequency. In our third range, there were only 3 kiddos who scored in that range. So you write the 3 here, and you add it to your previous score. So 23 plus 3 gives you the 26. Here there were 4 kiddos, so then you write down the 4. And we add 26 plus 4 and we get 30. So that's how you would find the cumulative frequency, by adding the different frequencies all together. And by looking at this chart too, we can answer different questions. By looking at this, we can also conclude that most students could run the race in somewhere between the 14 to the 14 and a half or 14.5 seconds. That's where most students' scores were. We can also take a look at this and we'd be able to figure out the lowest frequency, which would be the 3. We already figured out the highest frequency, so we can also make predictions with this. So there's different ways to look at this table and interpret the data. Another way of looking at the data and interpreting it would be using relative frequency. So if we take a look at this chart here, it has all of the same scores from the chart on the previous page, everyone's same times. Here though, they've just kept each score separate. So they've got the 13.7, 13.8, and so on all the way to 15.4 seconds. What they've done here in the tally then is they've marked how many times or how many kids scored within each of those times. So there were 2 scores for 13.7, 5 scores for 13.8, and so on. So the tally marks is just when you're keeping your running tally and you're marking down the times, it's easiest to just make tally marks, and then you go back later for frequency and you count those tally marks. So you would just write the numerical number for those tallies. So here we had 2 tally marks, so it would be 2. Here there were 5 tally marks, so you wrote down 5. In this last one, we have the relative frequency. So here they have this 0.07 or 0.7 hundredths. So that is when you divide this frequency 2 divided by the total number of scores. So when you add up all of these here, you get 30. So for this example, you would be dividing each of them by 30. So for the first one, we'd say 2 divided by 30, and that's how they got the 0.07. On the second one, they divided 5 divided by 30, And that's how they got the 0.17. So when you're doing the relative frequency, you compare the frequency of a category to the total frequency. So here's your frequency of the category, and you'd have to add all of these up in order to get the total frequency. So make sure that you go over any parts of the notes that you need to before heading off and doing today's lesson.